Hey, podcast listeners, it's Leah coming to you with another Roundtable replay. So, the podcast I'm recommending for you this week is the 1320 show from Daniel Pink. What he does in this podcast is basically create the Cole's Notes for the modern era. So, he interviews authors of business books and in 20 minutes with 3 questions really distills the essence of the book. So, I find it, a nice quick way to get through a bunch of recent books that maybe I don't have the time to sit and read through, but I kind of get the essence in that quick podcast. So that's one that I'm recommending. And so the one in particular that I was listening to was The Secrets of Highly Successful Groups with Dan Coyle. He was the author of The Culture Code. I was excited to see this one pop up into my feed because at the Roundtable, we spend a lot of time coaching groups and working with teams. And, maybe I suffer from confirmation bias, but what this podcast confirmed was, really what I've also observed in terms of highly effective habits of groups. So, what does Dan say is the most critical component for highly effective groups? Okay, spoiler alert, this is something I have talked about in so many of our replays, but it is safety. So, psychological safety is a critical component for highly effective teams. So, that's where you can experiment, you can try things, you can break things apart, and there's no fear of loss of status or retribution. Effective teams also are clear in their information sharings, and they create what Dan calls vulnerability loops. So those vulnerability loops improve the information sharing because an individual is willing to disclose something that might make them vulnerable. It builds trust on the part of the group who also share information, and so on. High vulnerability creates higher trust, which also then creates higher communication, and so on and so on. So the final thing that he talks about highly successful groups having in place is a clear and compelling purpose that is conveyed through stories. And why stories is because they're much more memorable in the mind of the recipient, much more so than, a PowerPoint deck. If you've been on the receiving end of a 60-page PowerPoint deck, it can be a bit of a snoozeville versus a great story. Think about it when you were a kid. Those things stick in your brain. You create new mental maps. And so often high-performing and highly effective teams also connect those stories with some really snappy catchphrases that really summarize the purpose and meaning behind the group. So effective teams have safety, vulnerability, high communication, and clear purpose. Easy peasy. So how come more organizations aren't doing this? Maybe, lots of reasons. Organizational inertia, maybe it's an organization that's grown through acquisition. There might be challenges of managing rapid growth, chasing the revenue and perhaps setting aside focus on the soft skills in light of the numbers, perhaps to the detriment of that. So in the podcast, they talk about what a leader can do in light of organizations that might not be in that highly effective state. So some simple things are creating after action reviews, so honest discussion about what worked and what they can improve on. The second was improving the levels of feedback. So they talk about magical feedback. I'll let you listen to the podcast, but the gist is taking feedback and putting it in the context of a broader organizational setting. And the final was about taking purpose and ensuring you have clear purpose and then creating strong catchphrases, which sounds really cheesy, but it's again creating strong mental connection for the recipients. Like at the Roundtable, we actually use the catchphrases and celebrate success monthly using them. So we talk about how people were dreaming big or making an impact or having fun or getting shit done. Those snappy catchphrases, it's very clear what the organization needs to do to be successful. So if you're really still curious about creating effective teams, reach out to me. I've got lots of information and resources. Culture Code is a great one, but there's also great academic research from Christopher Lowe and Ruth Wagaman that goes even deeper into essential and enabling conditions of team. Okay, well, that's all I've got for now on team, but there'll be more coming in the weeks to come with another Roundtable replay. Bye for now. Happy listening.